Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The rain had been falling steadily all day, not in a storm but in that endless, soaking drizzle that turned streets into mirror-black rivers and made the air heavy with the smell of wet asphalt. By the time the clock at the Easton bus terminal struck 11:45 p.m., the last passengers for the midnight route to Crestmont were already huddled under the awning, stamping their feet against the chill and checking their watches. The bus was scheduled to leave at midnight sharp. Route 279. A quiet ride through the winding state highway, with only 2 stops before the final station. It was supposed to be uneventful. But later, when investigators pieced together every fragment of that night, they would call this moment, this ordinary boarding of a late-night bus, the beginning of a nightmare. The driver, the man who climbed into the driver's seat at 11:50 p.m. was Walter Briggs, 59 years old, with the thick wrists and permanent scowl of someone who'd spent most of his life behind the wheel. Briggs was a veteran of the route, known for his punctuality and his no-nonsense attitude. He never talked much, a coworker would later say. Kept to himself. But he was dependable. That night, Briggs wore his standard uniform, dark slacks, a pressed white shirt, and a navy jacket with the company patch. He carried a battered thermos of black coffee and a small leather pouch he always kept near his feet. No one knew what was in it. The passengers. The first to board was a young couple, Adam and Claire Jennings, both in their late 20s, dressed for travel. They carried backpacks and whispered to each other as they found a pair of seats near the back. Next came Mrs. Helen Morris, a retired schoolteacher with a rolling suitcase and a small umbrella that dripped onto the aisle. She greeted Briggs with a polite nod, to which he responded only by punching her ticket. A group of college students followed, 4 of them, loud with the energy of youth. They had come from a bar, by the smell of it, and collapsed into the seats near the middle, cracking jokes and passing around a bag of chips. Thomas Leary, a traveling salesman in a gray suit, climbed aboard with 2 briefcases, muttering about the weather. He sat alone at the very front, constantly checking his watch as if the minutes themselves owed him money. A mother, Janet Crow, boarded with her little boy, Eddie, who clutched a stuffed dinosaur. They were heading to Crestmont to visit Janet's sister. She smiled nervously as she helped Eddie up the steps. Briggs gave them a long look before tearing their tickets. Others filed in as the clock ticked toward midnight. A nurse finishing a late shift. An elderly man carrying a paper bag of groceries. 2 brothers in construction jackets. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes who sat alone and watched everyone without speaking. By the time Briggs closed the doors, there were 24 passengers in total. The terminal clock struck 12. Briggs started the engine, and the bus rumbled to life. The sound echoed through the mostly empty station. The rain outside had lessened, but fog was rolling in, curling through the parking lot in white ribbons. As the bus pulled out of the terminal, the passengers settled into their routines, phones glowing, eyes closing, conversations drifting into quiet murmurs. The ride was expected to take just over 3 hours. Most intended to sleep, but not everyone would. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon through the woods. Streetlights grew sparser the further they went. Soon there were only the twin beams of the bus's headlights cutting through the fog. In the back, Claire Jennings leaned her head on Adam's shoulder. She whispered that she hated this route, that it always felt too empty. Adam laughed softly and told her it was just her imagination. At the front, salesman Thomas Leary jotted notes in a ledger, the scratching of his pen audible in the silence. Janet Crow hummed quietly to her son, who was already dozing against the window with his stuffed dinosaur pressed to his cheek. The nurse scrolled her phone. The college students sang under their breath. The quiet woman in her 40s still hadn't spoken. Briggs drove steadily, sipping from his thermos, eyes fixed on the road ahead. He barely glanced at his passengers. Mile marker 12. Around 12:30 a.m., they passed mile marker 12, a bent and rusted sign half hidden by weeds. Several passengers would later remember the spot. Not because of anything unusual, but because the fog had grown so thick that the bus seemed to be moving through a tunnel of gray. "Can't see a damn thing," one of the college students muttered. Briggs slowed slightly, gripping the wheel tighter. The passengers shifted, some pressing closer to the windows, others retreating into their seats. The sense of isolation deepened. The hitchhiker. At 12:42 a.m., the bus passed a lone figure standing by the roadside. Several passengers saw him. A man, tall, wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the fog. He didn't raise his hand to signal. He simply stood there, watching as the bus passed. "Creepy," whispered Claire Jennings, shivering. Adams squeezed her hand. "Probably just waiting for someone." Briggs didn't stop. He didn't even acknowledge the figure. But a passenger seated near the front swore later that she saw his knuckles whiten on the steering wheel as they passed. The first stop. At 1:15 a.m., the bus pulled into a small roadside station, just a covered bench and a vending machine. No one was waiting. The bus idled for 2 minutes, as per schedule, before Briggs closed the doors again. When they pulled back onto the highway, the fog seemed heavier, pressing in against the glass. The forest on either side of the road felt closer, the trees like skeletal arms. Tension. By 1:45 a.m., most passengers were asleep. The bus was quiet, save for the low hum of the engine and the occasional cough. But Mrs. Morris, the retired teacher, sat upright, hands folded on her lap. She later told investigators she had the distinct sense they weren't alone on that bus. "I thought someone had boarded at the stop," she would say. "But when I counted, the numbers didn't match." She couldn't explain what she meant, only that the air behind her seat felt heavier, as if someone was standing there. The last stop. At 2:20 a.m., the bus made its second scheduled stop at a lonely gas station on the edge of the county line. Again, no one was waiting. Briggs left the engine running and stepped out for a moment, lighting a cigarette under the flickering canopy. The passengers barely stirred. Some shifted in their sleep, others checked their phones. When Briggs climbed back aboard, he glanced down the aisle. His eyes lingered for a moment on the rows of faces, then moved on. He muttered something under his breath. No one heard it clearly. Some thought it was a prayer. Others thought it was a curse. 2:37 a.m. The bus rolled back onto the empty highway. The fog thickened again, swallowing the world outside. At 2:37 a.m., the bus radioed into dispatch for the last time. Route 279 on schedule. 24 aboard. Then silence. The bus never arrived in Crestmont. At 6:15 a.m., a trucker spotted the vehicle parked on the shoulder near mile marker 47. The headlights were still on. The doors were open. Every seat was empty. Not a single passenger, or Walter Briggs, was ever found. The abandoned bus. When Detective Marcus Hale arrived at the outskirts of the Pine Barrens, the pale dawn light gave the scene an almost surreal quality. A chill hung in the September air, and the trees stood like silent witnesses, their leaves rustling with every cold gust of wind. Ahead of him, down a dirt road, sat the bus that had been reported abandoned overnight. At first glance, it looked like any other old commuter bus. Faded paint, chipped exterior, a cracked windshield that hinted at years of use. But as Marcus stepped closer, he knew something about this scene was off. The bus door was wide open, hanging crookedly on its hinge, as though someone had forced their way out, or in. The responding officers had cordoned off the area, but their faces betrayed unease. Hale caught the eye of Officer Marquez, who stood stiffly beside the crime scene tape. "Morning, Detective," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "You'll want to see this for yourself. It's strange." Marcus gave a curt nod and ducked under the tape. The smell hit him first, a faint metallic tang that he recognized all too well. Blood. He stepped up into the bus. Inside, the rows of seats stood eerily still, every fabric cushion stained with dampness from the night air. The fluorescent overhead lights flickered weakly, powered by the failing battery. The floor was littered with scattered belongings: purses, a single sneaker, a child's stuffed rabbit with one ear torn off. It looked as though the passengers had left in a panic, but they hadn't simply walked out. Blood streaked the aisle, smudges on the seatbacks where hands had clawed for purchase. A shattered phone lay face down, its screen still glowing faintly with a cracked display. At the back of the bus, Marcus found something that made his stomach tighten. On the rear window, smeared in what could only be blood, someone had written a single word. Stay. The forensic team arrived shortly after, their cameras clicking as they documented the scene. Marcus crouched to examine the floor, noting faint drag marks that suggested at least one person had been pulled. But no bodies. Not one. How many were on board? He asked Marquez. The officer shuffled his notes. Manifest says 16 passengers. Plus the driver. 17 people had vanished. Without a trace. Marcus frowned, pulling on a pair of gloves. He began sifting through the abandoned belongings, searching for anything that might provide a lead. A wallet lay open, its ID slot empty. A journal with water-damaged pages contained entries that abruptly stopped 3 days ago. He flipped to the last legible one. Something's wrong with the route. The driver keeps looking in the mirror, like he's waiting for someone. Or something. I don't like it. None of us do. The handwriting trembled across the page, as if written in haste. Marcus closed the journal slowly. By mid-morning, the bus had been towed back to the impound lot in town for further analysis. Hale remained on site, scanning the surrounding woods. The forest pressed close to the road, dense and impenetrable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the trees themselves were hiding secrets. Deputy Larkin, a young officer eager but nervous, jogged up. Detective, we canvassed the area. No footprints, no tire tracks beyond the bus itself. It's like they disappeared into thin air. Nothing disappears without leaving a trace, Marcus muttered. He knew the Pine Barrens had a reputation, strange lights, whispers of cult activity, and local legends of people going missing. But he wasn't a man who believed in folklore. There had to be an explanation. Still, the silence of the woods pressed heavily on him. That afternoon, Hale returned to the impound lot where the bus now sat under fluorescent lights, its metal body hulking like a carcass waiting to be dissected. Forensic specialist Dr. Evelyn Carr met him there, adjusting her glasses as she scrolled through her tablet. We've dusted the bus for prints, she said. Odd thing is, most of them are smudged, incomplete, as if the people were moving quickly. But here's the strangest part. She led him to the driver's seat. Marcus leaned in. The leather was worn, the wheels still sticky with blood. But what caught his eye was the dash. Scratched into the plastic, etched so deep it must have been done with a knife, were the words, "Do not follow." Marcus exhaled slowly. Do we know who the driver was? Name's Charles Naylor, 49. Veteran driver for the route. His family says he's never missed a day of work in 20 years. And now he's missing with 16 others. Evelyn nodded grimly. There's more. We found residue on the floor near the back seats. Looks like candle wax. Black, melted into the carpet. Marcus stiffened. Candle wax. On a commuter bus. Rituals. Or something worse. That night, Marcus sat at his desk in the precinct, the evidence spread before him like puzzle pieces. The journal entry, the blood-smeared warning, the etching in the dash, the melted wax. It all painted a picture, but not one that made sense yet. He pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion threatening to cloud his thoughts. Why would a bus full of passengers stop in the middle of nowhere, abandon their belongings, and vanish into the woods? Unless they hadn't left willingly. His phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. You'll want to hear this, she said without preamble. We ran luminol on the seats. The blood patterns, they're not just random. They're shaped, arranged, like symbols. Symbols. Circles. Intersecting lines. Almost like a ritual marking. Marcus's pulse quickened. And one more thing, Evelyn continued. The word on the back window? Stay? Under ultraviolet, there's more. Additional words, invisible to the naked eye. It reads, stay where he cannot reach. Who's he? Marcus asked, but the line was quiet. Evelyn had no answer. The next morning, Marcus returned to the bus one last time before it was sealed for evidence storage. Standing in the aisle, surrounded by the silence of empty seats, he let his eyes wander. He imagined the passengers, talking, laughing, scrolling on their phones, before everything shifted into nightmare. His gaze caught on the reflection in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, he swore he saw movement, a shadow flitting between the rows of seats. But when he turned, there was nothing, only the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above. He rubbed his temples, unsettled. The bus wasn't just a vehicle. It was a message. And whatever had happened to those 17 souls, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Because abandoned buses don't leave warnings behind. People do. Or something else pretending to be people. The mystery deepened, the trail already pulling Marcus further into the unknown. Somewhere in the woods of the Pine Barrens, 17 missing lives waited to be found or accounted for. And the detective knew that if he followed their path, he might not return. But he had no choice. Because if he didn't, he feared the bus wouldn't be the last. The Lost Highway. Detective Marcus Hale didn't sleep that night. The case files lay scattered across his kitchen table, lit only by the faint glow of the desk lamp and the orange hue of his untouched coffee. The photographs of the abandoned bus stared back at him like accusing eyes, blood-smeared seats, scattered belongings, the single word stay. 17 people gone, swallowed by the Pine Barrens. Every missing person case carried a certain weight, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the numbers, or the strange ritualistic markings. It was the gnawing sense that something larger, something unseen, lurked behind it all. And then there was the highway. The bus hadn't simply stopped in the woods at random. The stretch of Route 57 where it was found was infamous to locals. They called it the Lost Highway. By mid-morning, Marcus found himself driving that very road. The patrol car's tires crunched over cracked asphalt, the forest pressing close on either side. The deeper he went, the more isolated it felt, like he was traveling into another world. Signs were scarce. Road markings faded to ghosts. The GPS on his dashboard flickered, then froze, stubbornly insisting he was off-road despite the pavement beneath him. The radio crackled with static, cutting in and out. "Dispatch, this is Hale," he said into the mic. "I'm about 2 miles east of mile marker 19. Can you hear me?" Nothing but static. Marcus exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. The Lost Highway had a reputation, stories told by truckers, whispers among townsfolk. They said vehicles disappeared here, that drivers would see strange lights in the woods, or lose hours of time without explanation. He never put stock in urban legends. But then again, he had never stood inside an empty bus with blood written on the windows before. He slowed when he reached the stretch where the bus had been found. The road dipped slightly, curving around a wall of pine trees. Pulling to the shoulder, Marcus stepped out. The forest here was silent. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the heavy, suffocating absence of sound. No birdsong, no rustling leaves. Just stillness. He walked the edge of the highway, noting faint scuff marks in the dirt that hadn't been there the day before. Boot prints, overlapping, leading away from the road and vanishing into the brush. Kneeling, he brushed the soil with his gloved hand. The prints looked recent. Marcus followed them a short distance until they ended at a shallow ditch. Something metallic glinted beneath the weeds. He pulled it free, an old key, tarnished and bent. Attached to it by a rusted ring was a small tag, almost illegible from grime. But under the dirt, faint letters emerged. Room 6. Motel key. He bagged it and stood, glancing deeper into the trees. The forest stretched on endlessly, the shadows thickening as the sun climbed. Whatever trail the missing passengers had taken, it seemed to bleed into the woods themselves. Back at the precinct, Marcus spread the evidence across the board. Photos of the bus. Notes on the passengers. The strange journal entry. Now, the motel key. Deputy Larkin leaned against the wall, frowning. "There's only one motel out that way," he said. "The Pine Crest. It's been closed for years." Marcus nodded. "We'll check it out tonight." Tonight? It's when the passengers vanished. If they left the bus willingly, something drew them off that highway. And if that motel's connected, we'll find out. Larkin shifted uneasily but didn't argue. Night fell like a curtain over the Pine Barrens. The two men drove back out along Route 57, their headlights cutting tunnels through the darkness. The forest loomed close, the branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. Finally, the crumbling sign of the Pine Crest Motel emerged from the dark. The letters were rusted and broken, the neon long dead. The building itself sagged under years of neglect. Shuttered windows, ivy crawling up the walls, the roof sagging like a tired old man's shoulders. Marcus parked, cutting the engine. The silence outside was immediate, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The motel office door hung ajar. Pushing it open, they stepped inside. Dust blanketed the floor, disturbed only by fresh shoe prints. A faded ledger lay open on the counter, the last entries dated nearly a decade ago. But a newer page had been slipped inside, handwritten in a shaky scrawl. Room 6. They said it would be safe. They lied. Larkin swallowed. That's not good. They moved down the row of rooms, their flashlights sweeping across peeling paint and broken locks. When they reached room 6, Marcus tried the key he'd found. It clicked open with a reluctant turn. The door groaned as it swung inward. The room smelled of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Their beams cut through the darkness, revealing overturned furniture, claw-like scratches on the walls, and a Bible left open on the nightstand. The pages were smeared with dark stains. On the far wall, written in jagged letters across the cracked plaster, were the words, "Follow the highway. He waits." Larkin's voice trembled. "Detective, what the hell is this?" Marcus stepped further inside, scanning every corner. The bedspread was torn. A suitcase lay half-packed on the floor, clothes spilling out. Beside it, a small locket gleamed in the flashlight beam. He picked it up, flipping it open. Inside was a photo of a little girl. On the back, an inscription, "To Mommy, love Claire." He recognized the name. Claire Donnelly, age 6. Listed as one of the missing passengers. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. The motel wasn't just abandoned. Someone had been here recently. Someone tied to those passengers. A sound broke the silence. From outside, faint at first, then louder, the rumble of an engine. Both men snapped their lights off and pressed against the wall, peering through the cracked curtains. Down the road, a bus rolled slowly into view. Headlights dim, its outline all too familiar. It was the same model as the abandoned one, but this one moved. Marcus's heart pounded as the vehicle came to a stop directly in front of the motel. Its door opened with a creak. No driver sat behind the wheel. And yet the bus idled, engine humming. The interior glowed faintly, each seat empty, except. Larkin cursed under his breath. There, in the very back row, sat a figure. Motionless. Watching. Marcus gripped his weapon, but something deep in his gut told him this wasn't a fight he could win with bullets. The figure in the bus didn't move. The hum of the engine filled the night. Then, slowly, the bus door began to close. And just as quickly as it had appeared, the vehicle pulled away, vanishing into the forest road as if it had never been there. Only the silence remained. Marcus and Larkin stood frozen, breaths shallow. Finally, Marcus spoke. "We follow it. Detective, are you out of your mind? That thing." "We follow it," Marcus repeated, his voice steady. "That's our lead. Whatever's happening out here, that bus is at the center." Larkin swallowed hard, then nodded reluctantly. As they left the motel behind, Marcus cast one last glance back at the message on the wall. "Follow the highway. He waits." He didn't know whose. But the road was leading them deeper into the heart of something terrible. And the lost highway had only begun to reveal its secrets. The motel guest book. The cruiser's headlights slashed across the pines as Marcus Hale and Deputy Larkin drove back down the lost highway, the Pine Crest Motel receding behind them like a rotting tooth swallowed by the night. Neither man spoke. The air in the car was heavy, saturated with what they'd just seen, the bus rolling silently down the road, the lone figure watching from its back seat, the words scrawled in blood-brown paint across the motel wall. "Follow the highway. He waits." Larkin's hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white. "Tell me you saw it too." Marcus nodded once. "I saw it. That bus moved on its own. No driver. No tracks in the dirt. And that," his voice faltered, "that person sitting in the back? They weren't right. I couldn't even see a face. Marcus stared out the window at the blur of trees. We're not dealing with anything that makes sense. Not yet. Not ever, Larkin muttered. They returned to the precinct just after 3 and Marcus carried the motel key and the locket upstairs into evidence. Sleep felt impossible, but his body was pulling him down fast. He collapsed into his office chair and let his head rest on the desk. When he woke, sunlight bled through the blinds. His neck ached. A thin stack of old motel records sat on his desk, placed there by the night shift clerk. Pulled these from county archives. The note attached read, Pine Crest Motel, operational 1962 to 2008. Marcus flipped through the brittle pages, dust rising with each turn. Room maintenance logs. Financial records. Staff rosters. Nothing unusual, until he reached the back. There it was, the motel guest book. The book was different from the rest. Bound in faded green leather, its pages bore thousands of signatures spanning decades. But what caught Marcus's attention were the patterns. Names repeated. The same people signed in, sometimes years apart, always booking room 6. A J. Calloway in 1972. Again in 1985. Again in 2001. The handwriting identical each time. A Sarah Donnelly, signed in 1990. A Claire Donnelly in 2007. And then 3 days before the bus vanished, Matthew Price. Marcus froze. He remembered the name from the missing passengers list. Price had been one of the last confirmed to board the bus. But there was something stranger still. Every page with a room 6 signature was marked with a symbol, drawn faintly in the corner of the page, like a stamp. A small circle, intersected by a single vertical line. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was the same symbol scratched into the walls of the motel room. Deputy Larkin appeared in the doorway, bleary-eyed, clutching 2 coffees. You're still at it? Marcus slid the guest book across the desk. Look at this. Larkin flipped through, brows knitting tighter. So, what? Same names, different decades? Maybe family members. The handwriting is the same. Look closely. Larkin did, then looked up. That's impossible. Exactly. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Marcus said, We're going back. That evening, the Pine Crest Motel looked even more skeletal under the dimming light. The wind rattled the rusted sign, making it creak like a groaning door. Marcus and Larkin returned to the office first. Dust still coated the counter, but the ledger was gone. Someone's been here, Marcus muttered. They searched behind the desk, through broken cabinets and drawers. Nothing. Then Marcus noticed the floorboard near the counter was loose. He pried it open. Inside, wrapped in rotting cloth, was another book. He pulled it free, brushing away the dust. This wasn't the guest book. It was smaller, bound in cracked black leather, its pages brittle. The first entry read, 1962, the first offering. They came willingly. Room 6 opened the way. Larkin swallowed hard. Offerings? What the hell does that mean? Marcus flipped further. 1972. J. Calloway returns. He remembers. He carries the mark. 1985. Again. The circle remains unbroken. 2007. The child knows the hymn. She sings it in her sleep. Marcus stopped cold. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. And then the last entry. 2023. The bus arrives. The last passengers. The highway is ready. He waits. Larkin's voice cracked. That's last week. Marcus closed the book, jaw tight. This isn't just a motel. It's a ritual site. They turned to leave, but a sound stopped them. The front door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Both men raised their flashlights, beams cutting through the gloom. A figure stood in the doorway. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in a faded gray suit that looked decades out of place. His skin was pale, stretched thin over sharp cheekbones, his eyes sunk in black hollows. He said nothing, only stared. Marcus gripped his sidearm. Who are you? The man tilted his head slightly, like a curious animal. Then, in a voice dry as rust, he said, I signed the book. And with that, he stepped back into the darkness of the lot. Marcus and Larkin rushed after him, but the man moved with unnatural speed, gliding more than running. He vanished around the corner of the building. They followed, but the lot was empty. No footprints in the dirt. No sign he'd been there at all. Back in the office, Marcus stared again at the guest book. His finger traced the repeating names. One name in particular. J. Calloway. The man in the suit. It had to be. They didn't leave the motel that night. Instead, Marcus insisted on combing every room, every corner. The deeper they searched, the more evidence they found that someone, or something, had been using the place long after it was abandoned. In room 3, an old suitcase with bus tickets inside. In room 8, a stack of children's drawings, each depicting the same image, a long black bus driving into the woods. And in room 6, beneath the torn mattress, Marcus found a second set of floorboards pried loose. Inside was a box. He lifted it out carefully. Dust exploded into the air. The box was wooden, carved with the same circle and line symbol. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. Inside were dozens of driver's licenses. All the missing passengers. Larkin whispered, "Jesus Christ." Marcus lifted the licenses one by one. Women. Children. All from different towns, different states. Some dating back decades. At the very bottom of the box lay one final item. A bus ticket. The date printed on it was tomorrow. The passenger name, Marcus Hale. Marcus dropped it like it burned. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. Larkin stared. That doesn't make sense. How could? But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at the wall. The words there were no longer faded. They were fresh, wet as though just painted. Follow the highway. He waits. The motel was alive. The guest book wasn't just a record. It was a prophecy. And Marcus Hale was next on the list. The passenger who never left. The night after discovering the motel guest book was restless for Detective Claire Halloway. Sleep clung to her in shallow bursts, each one interrupted by the ghost of a thought. Scribbled names, half erased, scratched out. Her mind replayed the signatures like a broken record. Passengers who were supposed to have arrived somewhere, but never checked out. The eerie echo of their absence throbbed through her chest. By morning, the sky outside the off-ramp motel was gray and overcast, a blanket of clouds heavy enough to press the air down on her shoulders. She walked out to the bus, where the vehicle sat cordoned by yellow police tape, its shell cold and waiting. The crime scene technicians had come and gone, leaving behind a silence that made the vehicle appear more like a tomb than transport. The bus's interior was stripped of passengers, but Claire felt, deep in her bones, that someone or something had remained. The phantom seat. The first step onto the bus jolted her in a way she couldn't quite explain. It was as though the air shifted against her skin, subtly colder, heavier. She moved carefully between the rows of seats, her boots echoing against the hollow floor. She paused near the middle, where a window seat drew her eye. Seat 14B. The fabric was different here, darker, like sweat had seeped into the material. A crumpled paperback novel lay open on the cushion. The forensic team had bagged and tagged almost everything left behind, phones, purses, luggage, but somehow this small book had been missed. Claire picked it up, careful not to smudge any potential prints. Its title, The Passenger Who Never Left. Her breath caught. It wasn't a published book. The cover was blank, no author's name, no publisher's mark. She flipped the pages and realized with growing unease that they weren't printed, but handwritten. The ink was uneven, blotchy, like it had been written in haste. And the first line made her stomach turn. We board, but we do not arrive. We ride, and we do not leave. One remains. The pages told fragmented stories, blurred recollections of passengers, their lives reduced to journal entries. A young mother named Annie with 2 daughters. A mechanic named Derek traveling to see his father. A teacher named Mariah headed to her sister's wedding. All stories abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Then came the chilling refrain at the bottom of each unfinished page. One remains. Claire closed the book and held it against her chest. She felt watched, as though whoever had written it was still on the bus, lingering unseen. Tracing the last rider. Back at the sheriff's office, she pored over the passenger manifest again. Names checked off at boarding, but none marked for arrival. 34 passengers boarded that bus. 34 souls unaccounted for. But when Claire ran the list against state DMV records, she noticed something unnerving. One name appeared that didn't belong. Martin Leland. The driver's notes mentioned him sitting quietly near the middle, row 14, exactly where the book had been left. But Martin Leland did not exist. No ID, no driver's license, no state record. The name was written in neat block letters on the manifest, but there was no proof such a man had ever lived. Still, several witnesses from the initial investigation remembered him. A tall man in a brown coat, they had said. Never spoke. Never blinked. Just sat there, staring straight ahead. Passengers vanished. Yet Martin Leland, the name that led nowhere, was the one every witness recalled most clearly. The gas station clerk. Claire's next stop was a dusty gas station along Highway 41, where the bus had fueled before vanishing. The clerk on duty, an older man with sunken cheeks and yellowed fingers, perked up when she flashed her badge. "You're asking about that bus again?" he rasped, lighting a cigarette. "Saw it. Filled up here. Spooky damn thing if you ask me." Claire leaned against the counter. "You remember anyone unusual on board?" The clerk nodded. "Yeah. A guy, long coat. Didn't blink much. Just stared at me through the window while I filled the tank. I swear, lady, it felt like he was waiting for me to do something wrong." Her stomach nodded. "Brown coat. Yeah, that's the one." Claire showed him the manifest with Martin Leland's name. The clerk's hands trembled as he tapped it. "That's him. But listen," he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You ever have someone look right through you? Like they're not seeing you at all, but the space you're taking up? That was him. Gave me chills." Claire scribbled the account down, though her hands shook slightly. Martin Leland wasn't just an odd passenger, he was becoming a shadow stitched into the story, a figure too present to ignore yet too absent to confirm. The surveillance tape. Back at the precinct, Claire requested the gas station's security footage. Hours later, a grainy black and white video arrived. She scrolled to the timestamp when the bus fueled. There it was, the vehicle pulling in under the floodlights. Passengers visible through the windows, some standing, some seated. And then she froze. Row 14B. There was a figure in the window, tall, wearing what looked like a heavy coat. But when the bus pulled away and the camera's angle shifted, the figure flickered. For a split second, Martin Leland's seat was empty. Claire rewound it again and again, the image jerking between occupied and empty. As if the man was both there and not there. One remains. The interview. That night, Claire sat across from a survivor, a man named Calvin Pike. He hadn't been on the bus, but his wife had. Her name was Lena Pike, age 29, last seen boarding the ill-fated ride. Calvin was pale, hollow-eyed, his voice cracked from weeks of repeating his loss. "She called me that night," he whispered. "Said she felt like someone was watching her. She was nervous, wanted to get off at the next stop. But when I asked her where she was, she went quiet. All I could hear was singing." Claire's pulse spiked. "Singing?" "Yeah. A man's voice. But like a hum." I said her name over and over, but she didn't answer. Just that voice. Then the call cut. Claire swallowed hard. "Could you describe it?" "The voice." Calvin shut his eyes, shaking. It didn't sound human. Like a choir in one throat. Returned to the bus. Haunted by the survivor's words, Claire returned to the bus late that night. The wind whistled through the cracked windows, carrying the scent of rust and stale gasoline. She walked straight to seat 14B. The book was gone. Her stomach dropped. She knew she'd left it at evidence, logged and sealed. But the cushion was indented, as if someone had only just risen from it. The silence deepened. Then, faintly from the far end of the bus, she heard it. A hum. Rhythmic. A vibration that crawled up her spine. Her flashlight beam shook as she swung it toward the sound. The bus was empty. Still, the hum continued, vibrating in the walls, in the very air. She felt it in her ribs. Not a voice. Not exactly. more like the sound of something ancient, something endless. Her hand brushed the cushion of 14B. It was warm. Cold. Her phone buzzed violently, shattering the hum. She jolted, fumbling it open. "Detective Holloway," she answered, her voice hoarse. The line crackled. "Did you find it?" a voice asked. She froze. "Who is this?" No answer. Just breathing. Then, words that chilled her to the marrow. "One remains." The line went dead. Claire dropped the phone, her heart pounding. The passenger was still here. Still waiting. Still watching. And if the book was to be believed, he always would be. The crossroads. The morning after Claire heard the voice on her phone, the town felt different. Not just quiet, but suspended, like the streets themselves were holding their breath. Main Street was mostly empty, a few shop signs rocking in the wind, their hinges squealing. The world seemed unchanged to the unknowing eye, but to Claire, every sound carried weight, every shadow stretched too long. She couldn't shake the phrase, "One remains." The passenger's presence lingered in her thoughts as tangibly as the cold weight of her service weapon on her hip. She had spent her career studying people, their motives, their lies, their violence. But Martin Leland was something else. Not a man, not a ghost, but a wedge jammed between reality and oblivion. And somehow, he wanted her to follow. The road out of town. Claire drove the two-lane highway leading north. The bus's path was clear. Every scrap of data placed it here before it veered off into mystery. Dashcam logs, GPS pings from passengers' phones, witness statements, they all traced the same trail. But then, at mile marker 57, they simply stopped. She pulled over, gravel crunching under her tires, and stepped out into the cool air. Before her stretched two roads. The main highway continued north, cracked but familiar, lined with telephone poles. The other was a narrow side road, nearly swallowed by weeds and thyme. A weathered sign leaned at the fork. The letters were faded, but Claire could just make them out. Crossroads. Her pulse kicked. The name didn't appear on any modern map. She double-checked her GPS. It showed nothing but blank space where the road stretched. Yet the path clearly existed. She walked a few steps down the overgrown lane, the crunch of her boots muffled by the silence. There was something heavy in the air, like static before a lightning strike. And then she noticed something strange, tire tracks. The grooves were fresh, pressed deep into the dirt. Bus tracks. The missing vehicle had turned here. The sheriff's warning. When Claire returned to the station, she found Sheriff Dalton waiting for her in the lobby. His large frame filled the entryway, his gray mustache bristling as he spoke. "You've been chasing that damn bus again," he growled. Claire narrowed her eyes. "That bus carried 34 missing people. I'm not going to stop chasing it." Dalton sighed and rubbed his temples. "You don't understand. Crossroads ain't somewhere you want to go. Old place. Bad place. Folks used to talk about it when I was a kid, said it was where deals were made. Deals with things better left alone." Claire's jaw tightened. "Superstition doesn't scare me, Sheriff. People's lives are at stake." Dalton leaned in, his voice low and grave. "It ain't superstition when you've seen what I seen. Stay away from that road, detective. Some passengers ain't meant to return." For the first time, she saw fear behind his eyes. But fear had never stopped her before. Into the crossroads. Night fell quickly as she drove back to mile marker 57. The fork in the road looked more ominous now, swallowed in moonlight and shadow. Against her better judgment, or maybe because of it, she turned down the crossroads path. The bus tracks guided her deeper into the dark. The trees leaned close, their branches clawing at her windows. Her headlights illuminated the crumbling asphalt, revealing strange markings etched into the surface. Symbols, circles, lines that twisted into one another like a maze. They were faint, almost burned into the road itself. The deeper she drove, the less her car seemed to exist. The hum of the engine dulled, her headlights dimmed, and her radio spat static even though it was off. Then her dashboard flickered. Her GPS screen lit up on its own, though she hadn't turned it on. Words scrolled across the display, jagged and glitching. "One remains." Her hands clenched the wheel. A shape appeared ahead. The bus. It stood in the middle of the road, tilted slightly, its headlights dead, its shell rusted like it had been abandoned for decades. Yet the tracks leading here were fresh. Claire slowed, her heart thundering. She stepped out, her flashlight cutting across the scene. The bus door was open. The air inside was colder than the night, a damp chill that sank into her bones. Rows of seats stretched ahead, their cushions ripped, belongings scattered. Shoes without owners, coats without bodies. And in seat 14B empty. But on the floor lay the book. The passenger who never left. She bent to pick it up, and this time the writing had changed. The ink was fresh, bleeding into the paper. And the words were no longer fragments. You are here now. You have chosen the road. One remains. And one must stay. Her breath caught. The book had written itself into her story. The conductor. The hum began again, vibrating the bus. Claire turned, her flashlight quivering across the aisle. A man stood at the far end. Tall, brown coat. His face was pale, features blurred, like a photograph smudged by water. But his eyes, God, his eyes, were voids. Empty sockets that stared without seeing. Martin Leland, she whispered. He tilted his head, like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. You came, he said. His voice was layered, many voices in one. Male, female, young, old, all harmonizing in a single inhuman chord. Claire's hand drifted toward her gun. Where are the passengers? His head tilted the other way. Gone. Taken. Given. But one always remains. I ride until another takes my place. Her throat went dry. You mean you're trapped? His smile was slow, unnatural. I am the fare. The cost of the road. When the bus takes them, one must ride forever. Until another chooses. Her skin crawled as realization dawned. Crossroads wasn't just a road. It was a trade. And Martin Leland was the price. The bargain. He stepped closer, his voice resonating like a hymn. You see now. You may leave, detective. Return to your world. But the bus will take more. Always more. Unless... He stopped, his head lowering. Unless you take the seat. Her blood ran cold. You want me to replace you. One remains, he repeated. It is the law of the road. The bus shuddered, the lights flickering. Shadows gathered around the seats, filling them, outlines of the missing passengers materializing. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, their lips whispering in unison. One remains. One remains. One remains. Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. If she sat, she'd vanish into the crossroads forever. But if she refused, the bus would keep taking others. More families destroyed. More lives swallowed by the road. She had chased justice her entire life. And now justice demanded a price. The escape. Claire backed toward the door, heart hammering. No. I won't play your game. The shadows hissed, the air thick with their voices. The bus lurched forward, even though the engine was silent. It began rolling down the crossroads path, dragging her with it. She stumbled out the open door, hitting the dirt hard. The bus screeched as it sped into the night, its windows glowing with spectral faces pressed against the glass. And then the road was empty. But on the ground beside her, the book remained. Its final page bore fresh ink, the letters jagged and wet. One remains. Not you. Not yet. Claire clutched it to her chest, gasping in the silence. The bus was still out there. The crossroads was still open. And she knew with bone-deep certainty, someday, it would come back for her. The motel clerk's tale. The storm rolled in by the time Claire pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Hollow Pines Motel. Rain sluiced across her windshield in thick sheets, lightning splitting the sky and briefly illuminating the sagging neon sign that buzzed faintly above the office. Vacancy. She wasn't here for sleep. She was here for answers. The crossroads had given her a glimpse of the truth, but it had also left her with something more dangerous. The book. The passenger who never left sat on the passenger seat beside her, damp from the storm. She hadn't opened it since she fled the bus. The weight of its presence felt like a hand on her chest. And this motel, this miserable, peeling outpost off Highway 9, kept appearing in the fragments of records she'd pieced together. Bus manifests, police reports, and even the sheriff's whispered warnings all pointed here. The missing had passed through these doors. Clerk. The office smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly green tint on the scuffed linoleum. Behind the counter sat a man whose age was hard to place. His hair was white, but his face, though weathered, seemed almost too intact for his years. His watery eyes flicked up when Claire entered, and something like recognition, followed by resignation, crossed his features. "Detective," he rasped as if he'd been expecting her. She stiffened. "How do you know who I am?" The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. His fingers were long, bony, nicotine-stained. "They always send someone. Always after the bus." Her pulse jumped. "You've seen it." His gaze hardened, the weariness in his eyes deepening. "Seen it. Heard it. Checked them in. 34 passengers, once upon a night. Never checked out." The night of the bus. Claire pressed him, and slowly, haltingly, the motel clerk began to talk. His name was Harold Jennings, though he said it like it was borrowed, not owned. "It was storming. Same as tonight," he began. His voice carried the cadence of someone confessing more than recounting. "The bus came rolling down the lane, lights dim, engine coughing like an old man's lungs. I thought it would break down right there. But it pulled in neat as you like. 34 tired souls stepped off. Families. Travelers. A priest. A soldier. A girl no older than 16. Claire's chest tightened. She pictured the names she'd read on the passenger list, imagined them standing in the rain. "They came inside, all of them," Harold continued. "Each one signed the guest book. Room keys in hand. I remember their eyes, vacant, like they'd already been somewhere else before they ever got here." "And then?" Claire asked. Harold's hand trembled as he reached under the counter. He placed a thick, leather-bound book before her. Dust puffed up with emotion. The motel guest book. The pages were yellowed, fragile, but the ink was stark and fresh, like it had been written yesterday. Each signature stood neatly in a row. Claire's stomach twisted as she recognized names: Eleanor Marsh, Kevin Rowe, Hannah Bishop, every missing passenger. But the last name on the list froze her blood. Martin Leland. Harold tapped the page with a crooked finger. He was the last. Signed in, took the key for room 9. But he never left. He never left because the bus never truly did. "The waits, detective. Always waiting." Room 9. Claire asked for the key, her voice sharp. Harold's eyes filled with something like pity, but he handed it over. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The key was old, heavy brass, the number etched deep. She carried it down the damp corridor, each step echoing too loud against the warped floorboards. Doors lined the hallway, their peeling paint exposing layers of past renovations. Room 9 waited at the end. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. The room smelled of rot and something metallic, like old blood. The bedspread was torn, stuffing spilling out. Curtains swayed though the window was shut tight. And on the dresser sat another book. The same as hers. Its title was burned into the cover, "The Passenger Who Never Left." Her pulse spiked. She flipped it open. The words weren't random this time. They were direct, like a message written just for her. "Welcome, Claire. You are reading the same words Martin read." He took the seat. "Will you?" The lights flickered. The closet door creaked. The closet. Slowly, gun raised, Claire approached. The door swung open with a groan. Inside was nothing but darkness. But then her flashlight caught something. A coat. A long brown coat, tattered at the edges. Martin Leland's coat. And then a voice. "You don't belong here, detective." She spun, but the room was empty. Only her reflection stared back in the mirror above the sink. But her reflection wasn't moving with her. It stood still, its lips curling into a smile. Her heart lurched, breath ragged. The reflection raised its hand and pointed to the bed. Claire turned. Someone was sitting there. The passenger. He looked younger than she expected. Pale, thin, eyes sunken but sharp. Martin Leland. "I told you at the crossroads," he said softly. "One remains." I remained. But the road doesn't care for names, Claire. Only balance. If you don't take the seat, someone else will. Perhaps Harold. Perhaps the sheriff. Perhaps. He paused, his gaze piercing her. Someone you love. Her skin prickled. She had no family left, no close friends. But the suggestion was enough to plant the seed of fear. Martin stood, his coat shifting like shadows. You've walked the road, touched the book, asked the questions. You're already part of it. The only choice left is when you'll ride. He stepped toward the closet, and as he did, the shadows swallowed him whole. The room went still. The bed was empty. The clerk's confession. Claire returned to the office, clutching both books. Harold stared at her pale face and nodded grimly. You saw him, he said. It wasn't a question. Claire slammed the books onto the counter. What are these? Why do they keep appearing? Harold sighed, shoulders sagging. They're ledgers. Not of this motel, but of the road. Each time the bus takes passengers, a ledger remains. A witness. Proof of the bargain. And the next rider always finds it. Just as you did. Her jaw tightened. Why didn't you ever stop it? His eyes darkened. Because once, detective, I was the rider. I took the seat. Years passed like days. Then the road offered me a choice. Run this place and watch, or stay on the bus forever. I chose this. Claire recoiled. You let them go. All 34. Harold's voice cracked. If I hadn't, it would have been 35. Me among them. And the bus always demands another. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the office in stark white. Claire stared at the old man, realizing with horror. He wasn't just the clerk. He was the keeper of the crossroads. The warning. Harold leaned forward, voice urgent. The bus isn't done with you, Claire. It never is, once you've stepped aboard. But listen, don't take the seat. Don't give in. There are worse fates than death. What's worse than being trapped on that bus? She demanded. His answer chilled her blood. Becoming the driver. The words hung between them, heavy and final, as thunder shook the motel walls. The storm pounded harder as midnight settled over hollow pines. The motel sign outside sputtered and died, plunging the lot into darkness. Inside the office, Claire stared at Harold Jennings, her knuckles white against the counter. You mean to tell me, she said, her voice low, that the bus doesn't just take passengers, it makes someone the driver? Harold nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with memory. Always has, always will. The road doesn't run itself. Someone's got to steer it. The driver isn't chosen at random. It's whoever's closest, whoever's ripe for it. You walk too far down the crossroads, you breathe too deep of its dust, you open that book. He tapped the ledger Claire had set down, its leather cover gleaming faintly in the lightning. It has your scent now. Claire's stomach tightened. The words in room 9 came rushing back. Will you take the seat? The story of the first driver. Harold's voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid the storm itself might be listening. The first driver wasn't a man at all. Least not anymore. Used to be a sheriff back in 32. Bus ran off the road in a flood. Killed most everyone aboard. Sheriff went out to drag the bodies in. Never came back. Next thing the town knew, the bus was running again, but the man behind the wheel wasn't the sheriff they knew. Eyes all wrong. Skin pale like paper. He just drove. Kept driving. And the passengers? Claire asked. Gone, Harold said simply. Gone like they'd never lived. Folks say the sheriff made a bargain with the road. Take him, spare the others. But the road don't spare. It just collects. And since then, every time the bus rolls, someone new wears the driver's face. Claire tried to process his words. She thought of Martin Leland's haunted eyes, of the ledger that knew her name. The road wasn't after passengers alone, it was after permanence. A conductor. The road calls. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She sat in room 7, her gun resting on the nightstand, the ledger open in her lap. The storm's howl blended with the motel's groans. The pages were blank one moment, then crawling with words the next. The driver waits. The seat is empty. You are next. The words bled across the page like oil. Claire slammed the book shut. She thought of the people who had vanished, Eleanor Marsh, Hannah Bishop, the soldier, the girl of 16. 34 names. She thought of Harold, who'd traded his own seat for decades of false freedom. She wouldn't become part of the road's machinery. She wouldn't be its driver. But the question gnawed at her. If not her, then who? The road reappears. At 3:07 a.m., headlights cut across the parking lot. Claire's pulse jolted. She pushed the curtains back. There was the bus. Its chrome grille gleamed with rain, its windows fogged and dark. The engine idled low, like a growl. No driver behind the wheel, at least none she could see. But the door yawned open with a hiss. Claire's breath caught. She could see the empty seats inside, stretching back into shadow. A faint glow pulsed at the far end of the aisle, like a lantern in a cave. The ledger on her nightstand flipped open on its own. Pages turned, one after another, until it landed on a fresh entry. Her name, Claire Donovan. She grabbed her gun, heart hammering, and stormed out of the room. The clerk's final plea. Harold was waiting in the office, trembling hands clutching the counter. "Don't do it, detective. Don't go near it." "It has my name," Claire snapped, rain plastering her hair to her forehead. "It won't stop until I face it." Harold shook his head, panic raw in his eyes. "You don't understand. The moment you step on, you're not a passenger. You're a contender. The road chooses its driver from those who dare step inside." Lightning lit the sky, and for an instant, Claire thought she saw Harold's reflection in the office window, not old and broken, but young, wearing a bus driver's cap, eyes glowing white. She staggered back. "It was you." Harold looked away, shame hollowing his face. "Once. A long time ago. But I escaped. Thought I did. Maybe I never did. Maybe I'm still behind that wheel." The storm howled louder, rattling the glass. The bus's horn blared, a deep, mournful sound that vibrated in her bones. It was calling her, boarding the bus. Claire stepped into the rain. Each drop felt like ice against her skin. The bus loomed larger with every step, its doors still open, its stairwell lit by a dull yellow glow. Her boots hit the first step. The air shifted. The rain grew muffled, distant, like she was slipping into another world. Inside, the smell of mildew and rot clung to the cracked vinyl seats. She walked slowly down the aisle, her flashlight beam bouncing across the rows. Every seat bore an imprint, as if someone had just risen moments before. A faint whisper carried through the cabin. Not words, voices. Dozens of them, layered together, weeping, murmuring, calling names she recognized from the ledger. At the driver's seat, the wheel gleamed wet, untouched. But when she raised her light, her heart slammed in her chest. Someone sat in the seat after all. The driver. He was faceless. Skin stretched smooth where eyes and mouth should be. His head turned toward her anyway, sensing her presence. His hand rested on the wheel, the other gripping the lever that opened the door. And in the hollow where his mouth should have been, words still leaked out. "You are next." Claire raised her gun, her whole body trembling. "I'm not taking that seat." The driver tilted his head. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand from the wheel and pointed directly at her. The voices of the passengers rose in a chorus. Pleading, begging, demanding. The driver rose from his seat. The bargain. Claire stumbled back, the whispers crashing around her like a wave. The faceless figure stepped into the aisle, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Her flashlight flickered. The ledger in her pocket grew hot, burning against her side. She pulled it out, and the pages flared with light. Words bled across them, the ink alive. The driver must remain. The wheel must turn. Offer another. Or take the seat. Her throat tightened. Another? Harold? The sheriff? A stranger unlucky enough to stumble upon this cursed place? The faceless driver stopped just inches from her. He raised his hand again, this time pressing it against the ledger. The words shifted. Or the road takes the town. Claire's breath caught. She saw it, hollow pines swallowed by blacktop, houses crumbling into dust, people vanishing mid-step. The road didn't just take individuals. If it wasn't fed, it could consume everything. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But how do you shoot something that isn't alive? Detective. Claire whirled. Harold stood at the bus's door, rain streaming down his face. His voice was desperate. It's me it wants. It's always been me. I was the driver once. I never escaped. I've just been delaying the inevitable. Let it take me back. End it. The faceless driver turned its head toward Harold. For the first time, it hesitated. Claire's heart pounded. She had seconds to choose. If she refused, the road might take Hollow Pines. If she accepted, she became the driver. If she let Harold take the seat, was that saving him or damning him again? The driver pressed a hand against Claire's chest, cold as stone. The ledger burned in her hands. She shoved it into Harold's grip. If this is your bargain, then take it. Finish it. Harold's eyes filled with both fear and relief. He climbed the steps, trembling, and sat in the driver's seat. The faceless figure dissolved into mist, seeping into Harold's body. His face smoothed, his eyes glowing white. His hands gripped the wheel. The bus roared to life. The voices fell silent. The door hissed shut. Claire stumbled off into the storm as the engine growled, headlights cutting into the night. The Hollow Pines motel quaked as the bus pulled away, vanishing into the highway as though it had never been. When the lightning flashed again, the lot was empty. Only the ledger remained in her hand. The final page had changed. The driver is chosen. The road will rest. For now. Claire dropped to her knees, rain soaking her through, heart breaking as she realized Harold was gone, but not free. He was back behind the wheel, condemned to drive until the road demanded another. And she, Claire Donovan, was still marked. The desert was silent except for the faint hum of insects and the occasional groan of the cooling earth. The bus sat abandoned at the edge of the forgotten highway, its once white paint now dulled by sand and time. For weeks, investigators had walked the perimeter, pored over every seat, every scrap of paper left inside, and still, the mystery deepened. It wasn't until a deputy named Torres mentioned a legend he'd heard from his grandfather that the narrative shifted. A legend about the Night Riders. The sheriff had scoffed at first. Ghost stories had no place in a missing persons investigation. But when a retired trucker came forward, saying he'd seen a convoy of strange vehicles shadowing the bus on its final night, the whispers of folklore began to echo louder. The testimony of the trucker. The man's name was Albert Knox, 72 years old, his hands rough and calloused from decades of hauling freight across state lines. He leaned on a cane as he spoke, but his eyes were sharp, darting to the deputies as if daring them to dismiss him. I was on Route 191 that night, Knox said, voice gravelly. Wasn't much traffic out there. It never is after sundown. Around mile marker 40, I saw it. A bus running way too fast for that stretch. But it wasn't alone. Detective Harris leaned forward. What do you mean? Knox shifted. There were 3 cars behind it. Black sedans. No headlights. Just riding its tail. Close. Too close. Like they were herd in it. Could you make out the plates? Harris pressed. Knox shook his head. Too dark. But the way they moved wasn't right. Tight formation. Like they'd done it before. He paused, eyes clouding. And then, just before the ridge, they all disappeared. Like the night swallowed him whole. The room fell silent. Deputies exchanged uneasy glances. The Night Riders, Torres muttered. Knox's gaze snapped to him. So you've heard the stories too. The legend resurfaces. The legend of the Night Riders wasn't new. Locals in desert towns had told it for generations. A faceless syndicate, cloaked in secrecy, that roamed highways after dark. They hunted travelers, forced them off the road, and spirited them away. Some said it was a cult. Others swore it was ex-military, using the empty desert as their killing ground. No one had proof. Just rumors. Just whispers. But now, with Knox's testimony, detectives couldn't ignore it. A disturbing discovery. 2 days later, another clue surfaced. A farmer, repairing a fence near the pines that bordered the highway, found a patch of scorched earth. Burnt rubber streaks marred the dirt, as if vehicles had spun out in the same spot. And among the debris was something chilling. A shoe. A woman's flat, red leather, scuffed and torn. Detectives bagged it and sent it for testing. Within hours, the lab confirmed it belonged to Samantha Lewis, one of the missing passengers. The implication was clear: the passengers hadn't just vanished into thin air. Something had stopped them. Something violent. The sheriff's dilemma. Sheriff Grady had been skeptical of the night riders from the start. But as more evidence piled up, the trucker's testimony, the scorched patch of earth, the shoe, he couldn't deny that something organized, something deliberate had taken place. "We're not chasing ghosts," he told his team during a late-night strategy meeting. "We're chasing people. Flesh and blood. And whoever these riders are, they don't want witnesses." Detective Harris spoke up. "Then we use that against them. If they think no one's watching, that's when they'll strike again. We set bait. Another bus. Another run. Only this time, we're waiting." The room fell silent. It was risky, dangerous, but it was the only way forward. Preparing the trap. The plan was simple on paper: stage a decoy bus, loaded not with passengers but with undercover officers. Send it down the same stretch of highway at the same time of night. Wait for the riders to make their move. But there was no guarantee they would. And if they did, there was no telling how far they would go. Deputy Torres, who had grown up on those legends, was nervous. What if they don't just follow? What if they hit us with something bigger? People say the riders have tech, blinders, jammers. Stuff that scrambles radios. What if they cut us off? Sheriff Grady was firm. "Then we fight back. We bring more firepower. More eyes in the sky. If these riders are real, we drag them into the light." The test run. The night of the sting was moonless, the desert stretching in endless black on both sides of the cracked highway. The bus rumbled forward, its windows dark, its engine echoing off the canyon walls. Inside, a team of officers sat tense, weapons ready, radios crackling. For an hour, nothing happened. Just empty road, wind, and silence. And then headlights. Not from behind, but from the sides. Two black sedans emerged from the desert brush, slipping onto the highway without sound. Their beams stayed off, their engines low. A third appeared in the rear view, hugging the bus's tail. The trap had sprung. The sedans moved like predators, boxing the bus in. One on each side, one behind. The bus driver, a seasoned officer named Martinez, kept steady, resisting the urge to accelerate. "Units in position," Harris whispered into his radio. But before backup could move in, the radios fizzed. Static drowned every channel. Torres' worst fear had come true: the riders had a jammer. "Stay calm," Martinez muttered, gripping the wheel. The sedan on the left inched closer, so close the agents inside could see the faceless driver, a man in a black mask, eyes hidden, hands gloved. The one behind flashed its brights once, like a signal. And then, suddenly, both side sedans cut toward the bus at once, slamming into its flanks. The officers inside were jolted, tossed from their seats. "Brace!" Martinez shouted. The riders weren't trying to stop them. They were trying to push them off the road. The standoff. Martinez swerved hard, keeping the bus steady as it veered dangerously close to the embankment. Sparks flew as metal scraped metal. One officer leveled a rifle at the masked driver through the shattered window. But before he could fire, the rider pulled out something small and metallic, a flare gun. He fired point-blank at the bus's windshield. The glass spider-webbed with cracks, flames licking at the frame. Inside, chaos erupted. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the riders pulled back. The sedans peeled away, vanishing into the dark desert, their engines fading into nothing. The bus screeched to a halt. Smoke poured from its hood. The officers scrambled out, weapons raised, but there was nothing. Just desert silence. The riders had vanished again. The sting had failed. The night riders had shown themselves, proved they were real, but slipped away once more. No arrests, no bodies, no answers. But for the first time, there was undeniable proof. The officers had seen them, had fought them. The legend was no longer just a story. And in the distance, beyond the pines, a faint glow pulsed against the horizon. Fires. Torches. A gathering. The riders weren't finished. They were just beginning. The desert stretched wide and merciless under the night sky, a canvas of stars smeared across endless black. The failed sting operation still weighed heavily on Sheriff Grady's shoulders. They had seen the riders, fought them, yet they had nothing. No arrests, no answers, just more questions. But something had changed. The officers weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were chasing people. And the faint glow spotted in the distance, those fires in the pines, could no longer be ignored. "This is it," Grady said, his voice rough as gravel. "Their den. Their gathering place. If we don't go now, we'll never get another chance." Detective Harris exchanged a glance with Deputy Torres. "And if we do go, we might not come back." Grady looked past them, toward the empty highway that had swallowed 20 souls and spat out nothing. "Then will be the last stop before it happens again." Into the pines. The convoy rolled quiet. 2 patrol SUVs, the decoy bus now rigged for surveillance, and a tactical van carrying SWAT officers armed to the teeth. Radios stayed silent. Everybody knew they'd be useless once the riders lit up their jammers. Torres gripped the wheel, sweat slicking his palms. "Feels like we're driving into a story my grandma used to tell," he muttered. "She said the riders don't kill you fast. They take you, break you, make you one of them." "Fairy tales," Harris said, but his voice betrayed doubt. The treeline loomed, torches flickering between branches. And then they saw it. A clearing carved out of the woods, centered around the charred husk of a Greyhound bus. Its windows shattered, its frame blackened, the stench of burnt rubber and oil still lingering. "The missing bus," Grady whispered. But it wasn't empty. Figures in black masks circled it, torches in hand, their movements ritualistic, almost rehearsed. At least 20 of them, maybe more, all dressed identically. The night riders. The trap springs. "Positions," Harris hissed. SWAT officers fanned out, rifles raised. But before the sheriff could give the order to advance, the forest came alive with engines. Headlights ignited in the distance, flooding the clearing. Black sedans roared forward, cutting off the exit routes. They'd been expected. "Fall back," Grady barked. But it was too late. The riders descended. Masked figures poured from the woods, wielding chains, clubs, makeshift weapons. Their movements weren't frantic, they were precise. SWAT opened fire, bullets ripping through the air, but the riders scattered like smoke, using the trees as cover. One sedan barreled into a patrol SUV, flipping it onto its side with a deafening crash. Officers scrambled out, coughing through shattered glass and dust. The clearing had become a war zone. The face of the riders. Detective Harris ducked behind the wreck of the SUV, firing into the dark. A figure lunged at him from the shadows. A rider with a jagged hunting knife. Harris tackled him, slamming him into the dirt. The mask cracked on impact. And beneath it wasn't some faceless ghoul. It was a man. Ordinary. Middle-aged. Brown hair, lined face, eyes bloodshot but alive. "Who are you?" Harris demanded, pressing the barrel of his pistol to the man's temple. The rider only smiled, lips curling around broken teeth. "The road doesn't end. It only feeds." Before Harris could respond, the man shoved a blade into his own throat, blood spurting across the dirt. The detective staggered back in horror as the rider convulsed and went still. They weren't just soldiers. They were zealots. The keeper appears. Through the chaos, Torres spotted movement atop the burnt bus. A man stood there, taller than the others, his mask painted crimson. Unlike the others, he didn't carry a weapon. He carried a book. A red leather-bound notebook, the same one detectives had found torn pages from weeks earlier. The keeper. He raised the notebook high, and the riders froze mid-combat, their torches flaring brighter. "Tonight," the keeper's voice thundered over the chaos, "the road claims its last stop." His words ignited the riders, who surged forward with renewed fury. Officers were dragged from cover, weapons knocked away, their screams swallowed by the chanting of masked zealots. The last stand. Sheriff Grady knew the fight was lost. Outnumbered. Outflanked. Radios jammed. Back up miles away. Fall back to the bus, he roared. The surviving officers rallied, forming a circle around the decoy bus. Gunfire lit the clearing, muzzle flashes strobing against the trees. The riders came in waves, relentless, chanting their creed. The road doesn't end. The road doesn't end. Harris took a hit to the shoulder, blood soaking his shirt. Torres dragged him behind cover, firing blindly with his sidearm. Grady emptied his shotgun, shells clattering at his feet. And still they came. The keeper's revelation. The keeper stepped down from the wrecked bus, walking calmly through the hail of bullets. None of the riders touched him. He stopped before Sheriff Grady, the notebook pressed against his chest. "You seek answers," he said, voice calm, almost fatherly. "The bus was chosen because it carried the willing. They wanted release from the hollow lives you cling to. We gave them purpose." "You murdered them," Grady spat. The keeper tilted his head. "No, we freed them. And now, you too will ride." With that, he opened the notebook. Pages fluttered in the wind, and on each one was a name. The names of the missing passengers. And below them, the names of officers, investigators, even townsfolk who had dared to ask too many questions. At the bottom of the page, freshly written in red ink, were 3 names: Grady, Harris. The sheriff's stomach dropped. The inferno. The riders moved as one, dousing the decoy bus with gasoline. Flames leapt high, illuminating the clearing in hellish orange. The officers inside scrambled to escape as fire swallowed the vehicle. Grady tackled the keeper, wrestling for the notebook. But the zealot was strong, his grip unshakable. "You can't stop the road," he hissed. Harris, bleeding and desperate, raised his pistol and fired. The bullet tore through the keeper's chest. He staggered, blood soaking his robe, but his smile never faltered. "The road doesn't end," he whispered one last time before collapsing into the flames. The riders screamed in unison, a sound not of grief but of exultation, and charged one final time. The breaking dawn. By the time reinforcements arrived, the clearing was empty. The burnt husks of vehicles smoldered. The decoy bus lay in ruins, blackened and skeletal. Dozens of shell casings littered the ground. Blood stained the dirt, but the riders were gone, vanished into the desert like smoke on the wind. Sheriff Grady stood with Harris and Torres, battered, bloodied, barely alive. They had survived, but the notebook was gone, stolen back into the night. The case would go down unsolved. Official reports would cite a failed sting, an ambush by unknown assailants. But the truth, the riders, the keeper, the road that never ended, would be buried. Weeks later, Torres sat alone in his patrol car, parked along the same stretch of highway where it had all begun. The moon hung low, the desert quiet. And then, faintly, he heard it. Engines. 3 of them. Moving in formation. No headlights. The night riders. He gripped the wheel, heart pounding as they passed by, black sedans gliding like phantoms. For a moment, one driver turned his head. Behind the mask, Torres thought he saw a familiar face. Samantha Lewis. Alive. The riders disappeared into the night, leaving Torres shaken, the echo of their creed burning in his mind. The road doesn't end. The road doesn't end. And deep down, he knew it was true. The night riders weren't finished. They never would be. The bus had simply been the last stop, for now.